today to pay tribute to all the women, big and small, young and old, sisters, mothers, daughters, who have graced our lives with their presence, their energy, and their spirit. We understand that many aren't able to be here today with us, and for this, we hold a candle and sage and prayer and acknowledge all the women who aren't able to be here with us today. You may shout out the name of anyone, ancestor, sister, mother, daughter, child, who has not been able to be with us here in spirit nor in person.
Susie Odessa Space Franklin.
Harry Brown.
Claudine K. Brown. Carrie Smith.
Regina Williams. Idella Thomas. Sandra Bland.
Gloria Thomas.
All the women who transcended in the spiritual passage. All the Egungun.
Ashe.
At the closing, we would like to pay tribute by offering a song prayer for all the women who have triumphed over neglect, abuse, abandonment, mental illness, and hurt of any type or kind. And we acknowledge all the women who are survivors of rape, survivors of domestic violence, who have overcome against all adversities and stand and is able here, there, everywhere to tell their story, her story, walking proud with head on her shoulders, relaxed and graced in her presence, being a woman. Yeah, 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 yeah. Ooh, oh, oh, ooh, ooh, ooh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ooh, oh, oh.
Peace and blessings, everyone. Buenos dias. I have to start, go off the page. My heart is feeling extremely full to be in the presence of all of you and to be a part of the panel. And I have to thank Sister Iman for always making sure that Latin America, Black women of Latin America, Afro-descendant women of Latin America are part of her conversation. I am a proud Panamanian woman of Caribbean descent, and we don't get seen. I can walk by and be completely invisible to most that we even exist. So to be here is very filling for the women I stand before you for, because we don't get seen. And when she asked us to name our representation, I quickly wrote, making our reality visible. And we are not visible. So I will share some of our stories with you today. The Network of Afro-Descendant Women of Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Diaspora was created in 1992 to link the efforts in the continent to deal with the racism and sexism, making visible the marginal situation in which millions of Afro-descendant women live due to discrimination for reasons of race and gender. Combating the prejudices and stereotypes toward us that exist in society. Promoting the participation of Afro-descendant women in all arenas of public life and decision-making, and demanding that the states promote public policies in our favor. The International Decade of People of African Descent, proclaimed by the resolution by United Nations General Assembly to develop between 2015 and 2024 will be centered following, these are our objectives, to promote respect, protection, and realization of all human rights and fundamental freedoms of Afro-descendant people as recognized by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. To promote greater knowledge of and respect, it may sound minimal, but respect for the diversity of the heritage and culture of Afro-descendants and their contribution to the development of societies. There is not one Latin American country that does not have an African story. And we need to keep that in mind. To improve and strengthen the national, regional, international judicial frameworks in conformity with the Durban Declaration and Action Program. In this context, we, the network of Afro-descendant women, have proposed to direct our struggle and expand our efforts to make the situation of Afro-descendant women visible and strengthen our actions to influence governments so as to achieve advances in standard of living and greater opportunities for Afro-descendant population of Latin America and the Caribbean. At proposing our platform, we serve as the basis of Afro-descendant women's action in their struggle and demand the societies and the states. Our population is 30% of the population of Latin America. Nearly 200 million people submerged in disproportionate levels of poverty and social inclusion and facing severe discrimination in all orders. Our ancestors were pulled out of Africa and brought to America by force. In these lands, we were enslaved and their strength exploited until their death. But many men and women rebelled and survived, constructing an identity and a culture that endures us till today. The history of miscegenation that has marked the creation of the Afro community is reflected in the current diversity of cultural features of the Afro-descendants in the Americas, which becomes particularly evident when considering their languages and religious norms. Although slavery was abolished in the 20th century and the principles of equal rights for the Afro-descendant population were established, we are still facing racism and discrimination as Afro-descendants, in addition, in gender discrimination as women. Afro-descendant women have denounced the fact that the absence of racial discrimination makes the situation for Afro-descendant population, especially women, invisible in the official statistics offering data and information. This limitation has forced them to create awareness of existence of racism with few, although no less valid examples backed by rational perspective of knowledge and science, thus creating a critical discourse capable of demonstrating their existence. So it took a lot to pull this presentation together because our numbers don't exist. They don't see us, so they don't count us. We're not included, so it's hard to even find some of those numbers. So there's only specific countries that you will hear me speak on. Afro-descendant women, in knowing that, we've still demonstrated the effects of racism on women in public policies and the racial nature of the violence toward women that ranges from demonstrating the stereotype images of their bodies in the media, where they appear hyper-eroticized or sexualized roles as servants, to the daily violence in the public sphere by the police apparatus. To transform, I'm gonna speak specifically to some numbers because I think I need to get to that. Majority of the numbers I will be speaking on are Colombia and Brazil because those are the two largest populations that we know of. Outside of the continent, Brazil has the largest population of people of African descent. Second to Brazil is Colombia. And then you have countries like the Dominican Republic. Meanwhile, neither census nor official surveys include any ethnic racial variable. So there's no information about this population group, thus there are 90% of that population are people of African descent.
Yes.
So it assumes you would think that their numbers should be there. 51.4% of the population are women, but yet we couldn't find the numbers because you can't even check off black in Santo Domingo. For their black means India. So Indian, and then they have mestizo and but the term black is not even an option. So to even find those numbers for Afro-descendant women is almost an impossible task. Femicide is gruesome, recurring gender-based genocide that has taken women and young girls to their early demise. According to the United Nations, in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, husband, boyfriends, and other family members committed 66% of the violence and murders reported against women. Furthermore, according to the UN Women Report, women from Colombia and Nicaragua were kidnapped collectively and sexually abused and abandoned. March 2013 officially marked two decades of finding missing women murdered in cold blood by lurking drug trafficking organizations that have hoped to exploit and sell women's bodies for profit by means of prostitution and exploitation. The abduction, in fact, kidnapping, is one of the many forms of violence regularly practiced against women and young girls in developing countries. Other abuses include rape, sex trafficking, child marriages, and child prostitution. The abductions of girls, use, misuse, abuse, selling of girls is a fairly wide practice in Latin America. In Brazil, for example, statistics indicate that the number of murdered Black women has increased 54% over the last 10 years, while that of white women has decreased 10%. And more than half of the crimes against women took place in their homes. Black women have difficulty accessing the network, not only to protection against violence, but to all other forms of violence. Many are afraid to resort to the state in case of violence because they know that the state killing Black men do not trust the system as a whole. Actually, when you think of what we are going through in Black Lives Matter here, Black Lives Matter in Brazil supersedes the US. Black Lives Matter in women and violence in the US is superseded in Brazil. 10,000 women in Brazil took to the streets last year because of the numbers of murders of Black women. So Sandra Bland is repeated 20 times more, actually right now, in Brazil than here. In Nicaragua, we have minimal figures because they bunch in indigenous women with Afro-descendant women. They don't separate us, even though our experiences are very different. So indigenous and Black women were denouncing more, and you can display a cultural complaint in woman, although there are no quantitative details of the complaints of these Afro-descendant women and indigenous women. In addition, the Nicaraguan Caribbean coast, which is Bluefields, Puerto Cabezas of Nicaragua, with the majority of them being indigenous and Afro-descendant women, the higher percentage of women have suffered some form of violence. Now, specific to Colombia, 54.5% of African population of Colombia are women, more than 2 million. 21.9% of Afro-Colombians are displaced. Outside of any war-torn country, Afro-Colombians are the most displaced people in the world currently. Bogotá is the city that welcomes women of African descent, approximately 53,000, followed by Medellin and Santa Marta, which approximately 52,000 and 42,000 respectively on data. According to Afrodes, which is a national association of displaced Afro-Colombians, there was a decrease of 21.7% participation of Afro-Colombian women in organization as results of their threats. Recently, one of my colleagues, Francia Marquez, who created a march from Cauca to Bogotá, and it was called Dia de los Turbantes, the turbans, because in Colombia it is written in the books that they have ancestral land. They're protected, those lands are protected, yet because of the maquiladoras, the mining companies are coming in, they're displacing them. And you know, when we talk in the US about, oh, we can wait for tomorrow, in Colombia they can't wait. They are getting killed for something that we are talking about here. So right now she's in hiding for speaking up the way I'm speaking for her and calling out her name because she's speaking for the truth of her people and the women in her community. So when you speak in Colombia, you end up on a death list and you get killed. That's that reality. The Afro-descendant women in Colombia are 29.3% householders and compared to 28.6% of Afro-Colombian men. Now, Mexico, we talk of Bring Back Our Girls in the 219. Prior to Bring Back Our Girls, there was the women of Ciudad de Juárez, the women of Mexico. The phenomenon of female homicide in Ciudad de Juárez, called Spanish femicidio, involves the violent deaths of hundreds of women and girls since 1993 in the northern Mexican region of Ciudad de Juárez, Chihuahua, a border city across Rio Grande from the U.S. city of El Paso, Texas. As of February of 2005, the number of murdered women in Ciudad Juárez since 1993 is estimated at 370. The murders of women and girls in Ciudad Juárez since 1993 received, like the Chibok girls, a lot of international attention, but neither the U.S. government nor the Mexican government have taken responsibility for the killing of the girls. What makes this extremely interesting is that many of the victims share common physical attributes, including their dark skin, slender physique, and dark hair. So which does that say? There's black women in Mexico. These are the black women in Mexico. In terms of crimes, similarities across cases include they're getting raped, tortured, mutilization, and murdered. Some other numbers: 700 women were killed in Guatemala last year because they were female. El Salvador has the highest rate in the world with an average of 12 murders for every 100,000 women. Guatemala is third with 9.7%, and Honduras is seventh with an average of 7. Still, the figures are high enough or frightening enough to constitute a severe humanitarian crisis, but we're not talking about this because the women that are getting killed look like most of us in this room. And we are not seen as those that matter. In Guatemala, only 2% of the murder cases were investigated last year. Remember, I said 700, and only 2% were investigated. In Honduras, less than 2% were investigated. And Honduras had the 7th and the largest in the region. And then we think of Argentina. How many people think there's a black community in Argentina? Okay. Argentina actually also has victims. They're used as slave workers. They're moved from Argentina and taken as forced to labor and sexual and trafficking. Women and girls who end up being trafficked in Argentina go to other countries, often lured by false pretenses for jobs, and then get killed while they're there. The network also includes Haiti in our numbers. We include the Latin American, the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, and then Haiti. And those numbers are very high, 162 in 2012, 720 in the mid-2000s. And what makes Haiti very unique is that Haiti is an issue of the poverty level and then the earthquake, and then you had all these humanitarian organizations going, and families were handing over their daughters to these families for better living. And what ended up happening is that these girls then became slave workers, trafficked, maids to some of these families. So there's actually a program that one of my colleagues, may she rest in peace, Anne-Marie Coriolan, was working with the rest of us. So they were rescuing these girls back to bring them home because they were taking them for better living, and then the families were finding out that they were in worse situations. So keeping all in mind, one of the things that the demands of the network is that the states guarantee protection of Afro-descendant women's security and integrity with no discrimination whatever, adopting measures to prevent racially or gender-motivated acts of violence against them, guarantee rapid intervention by the police, attorneys, and judicial branch to investigate and punish such acts and ensure that their authors, whether or not they're public official, do not enjoy impunity. That the states take measures to combat all incitement to discrimination or violence against Afro-descendant women through any communication media. That the states adopt measures to sensitize media professionals regarding the nature and incidence of discrimination against Afro-descendant women, helping them to see the responsibility in the non-perpetration of prejudice. That the states promote policies to halt gender violence against Afro-descendant women, as well as the kidnapping and trafficking of people for commercial sexual importation purposes and the use of women's images as sexual object. We demand justice. The states must adopt and publicize adequate mechanisms so that Afro-descendant girls, teenagers, and women can denounce physical and sexual violence, including sexual harassment and rape. And I close with the importance of making the connection to all, the suffering, wherever we stand. At the end of the day, we are Black women,
Yes.
wherever we are.
Yes.
And with that comes all of it, and the same of it. I may have a different accent from my Ia Stephanie, from my sisters before, but wherever we stand, we are suffering the same. And keep in mind, if we are suffering and if we're in Latin America, you may not even know we exist. So today I stand and leave you with the fact that we are here, we are present, we are Black women, we are living the same reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those statements. It amazes me how even till today, as many of these conferences, events that I've been to learn something new is an amazing thing, because I picked up a few things that I really didn't know, and I appreciate you educating these women and men that are here today.